My name is Amy Mercer. I'm 31 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my sister stood in my driveway, staring at my house like she'd seen a ghost. She didn't knock, she didn't wave, she just stood there, on the stone path with her designer bag hanging from one hand, and her mouth open like she was trying to remember how words worked. Then she pulled out her phone. I watched from the living room window as her fingers shook so hard she had to try the passcode twice. She pressed the phone to her ear, turned in a slow circle to take in the wraparound deck, the wall of windows, the Douglas firs swaying behind the house, and said 5 words that made the last 5 years worth every single sleepless night. "Mom, you need to see this." 23 relatives were arriving in 15 minutes for the opening of Grandma Debbie's time capsule. Lisa had expected to find the 540-square-foot apartment our mother had been describing to the family for years. The sad little place where poor Amy lived paycheck to paycheck, struggling with that computer thing she did. Instead, she was standing in front of a $980,000 home in West Hills with a valley view that stretched for miles. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what was in Grandma Debbie's time capsule, and before I show you what happened when my mother walked through that door, I need to take you back to the night I found out my inheritance never existed. At least, not for me. Before I take you back to the beginning, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story earns it. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I'm curious where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday in March, 5 years ago, the night Mary Aldridge handed me a folder that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. At 26, I was a freelance software developer working from a studio apartment in Southeast Portland. The place had one window that faced a brick wall, a radiator that clanked like a dying engine every winter night, and a kitchen so small I could touch the refrigerator and the stove at the same time. I didn't hate it. I told myself it was temporary, a stepping stone, the price of building something on my own. My income was unpredictable. Some months I cleared $7,000. Other months I scraped by on $2,800 and ate a lot of ramen. I had $54,000 in student loans and a payment of $640 every single month, whether I had clients or not. I kept a spreadsheet on my phone that tracked every dollar. Groceries, gas, utilities, the minimum payment on my loans. I knew exactly how much I could spend on coffee each week, which was usually zero. My mother, Jody Mercer, had a specific way of describing my life to relatives at family gatherings. She'd lower her voice just enough to seem concerned, but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Amy's still doing that computer thing. I worry about her. She doesn't have benefits, No retirement plan, no stability. It's just so risky." Then she'd glance at my sister Lisa and smile. Lisa has such a good head on her shoulders. Here's what my mother never mentioned. I wasn't just doing that computer thing. I was managing database migrations for 3 regional hospitals. I had a contract with a logistics company in Seattle worth $8,000 a month. I built a custom inventory system for a chain of restaurants that still sends me maintenance fees every quarter. I taught myself to code at 19 with library books and free online courses while Lisa was getting a business degree our parents paid for. I'd landed my first client at 22 while Lisa was planning her wedding. I'd built a reputation in a field my mother couldn't even name while she was telling everyone I was wasting my potential. But none of that registered on Jody Mercer's scoreboard. I didn't have a husband, I didn't have a house, I didn't have anything she could point to at Thanksgiving and say, "Look what my daughter built." So, in her mind, I was failing. My sister Lisa had bought a house at 28, 4 bedrooms in Lake Oswego, white shutters, a lawn that looked like it belonged in a catalog. My mother talked about that house the way other people talked about their children's PhDs. "Lisa saved up," she'd tell anyone who listened. "She's always been so smart with money." I believed her. I believed all of it. Until the night I visited Mary Aldridge and everything I thought I knew collapsed like a house built on sand. Mary Aldridge was 70 years old, with silver hair she wore in a braid down her back, and hands that always smelled like the lavender soap she made herself. She'd been my grandmother's best friend for 40 years. They'd worked together at the same insurance company in the 80s, raised their kids in the same neighborhood, buried their husbands within 2 years of each other. When Grandma Debbie died, Mary was the one who sat beside me at the funeral, while my mother fussed over flower arrangements and my sister greeted guests like she was hosting a cocktail party. Mary held my hand through the whole service. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. 2 years after the funeral, I drove to Mary's house in Selwood to drop off some photographs I'd found while cleaning out a storage unit. Pictures of Debbie and Mary from the 70s, young and laughing, their whole lives ahead of them. Mary made tea. We sat in her kitchen, which was cluttered with plants and books and ceramic birds her late husband had collected. She looked at the photos for a long time without speaking. Then she asked a question that stopped my heart. "Did the inheritance help with those student loans, dear? Debbie was so worried about you paying those off." I set my teacup down. The ceramic clinked against the saucer louder than I intended. What inheritance? Mary's face changed. I watched the confusion arrive, then the realization, then something that looked like cold, quiet anger. She stood up without a word, walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of her living room, and pulled out a manila folder. She set it on the table in front of me. "Your grandmother gave me a copy of everything. She wanted to make sure it was handled properly. She didn't always trust your mother with important things." I opened the folder. Inside was a document I'd never seen before. The last will and testament of Deborah Ann Mercer, dated 14 months before her death, notarized, witnessed, and signed on every page. I turned to the section on asset distribution. The words hit me like a physical blow. "I hereby bequeath my savings, totaling $87,400, to be divided equally between my 2 granddaughters, Amy Rose Mercer and Lisa Christine Mercer. Each granddaughter shall receive $43,700. I read it again, then a third time. $43,700? I'd never received a cent. My hands were shaking when I turned to the executor's page. There was my mother's signature at the bottom, neat and confident, accepting her role as executor of the estate. The date of execution was 3 weeks after the funeral. I looked at Mary. She was watching me with tears in her eyes. "She told everyone there wasn't much left," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "She said Lisa needed it more, for the down payment on her house." Mary reached across the table and took my hand. "I know, sweetheart, I know." I sat in Mary's kitchen for another hour. She told me things I'd never known. How Debbie had worried about me constantly in her final years. How she'd specifically mentioned wanting to help me pay off my student loans. How she'd made Mary promise to check in on me after she was gone. And how Jody had called Mary 2 weeks after the funeral to say that the inheritance had been distributed according to Debbie's wishes and everything was handled. "She lied to my face," Mary said. "She looked me in the eye and lied." That's when I stopped crying and started planning. The drive back to Portland took 40 minutes, but I don't remember any of it. I parked outside my apartment building, sat in the dark with the engine off, and stared at the brick wall through my windshield. My grandmother had left me $43,700. My mother had taken it. My sister had spent it on a house she flaunted at every family gathering, while my mother told everyone I was the one who couldn't get her life together. I thought about calling Jody. I thought about screaming, demanding answers, forcing her to explain how she could look me in the eye at Christmas dinner and ask if I was still in that little apartment while she knew that the money Debbie had left me was sitting in Lisa's kitchen in the form of marble countertops and stainless steel appliances. But I knew exactly how that conversation would go. My mother would deny it. She'd see Mary was confused, that the will had been different, that the money had been spent on funeral costs and medical bills. She'd make herself the victim. She'd call Lisa, and Lisa would back her up because Lisa always backed her up. My father would sit in his recliner and say nothing because Paul Mercer had never said anything about anything his wife did in 36 years of marriage. And within a week, my mother would have called every aunt and cousin and uncle to explain that poor Amy was having some kind of breakdown, that she was making accusations, that they should all be patient with her because she was clearly struggling. I'd become the villain. She'd become the concerned mother. Nothing would change. So I didn't call. I went upstairs to my apartment, sat down at my desk, and opened a new spreadsheet. I named it Receipts.xlsx. Then I started documenting everything. For 4 years, I let them think I was struggling. I let them pity me. I let them believe their own lie. Every Thanksgiving, I sat at Lisa's table and ate her food and listened to my mother praise the house that was built on my inheritance. Every Christmas, I opened small, thoughtful gifts from aunts and uncles who'd been told I couldn't afford much, so they shouldn't expect much in return. Every time my mother asked if I was still in that little apartment, I said yes. Every time Lisa offered to help me find something more affordable, I thanked her for her concern. And every night, I went home and worked. But that wasn't even the worst part. Let me tell you about my grandmother's funeral, the parts I didn't understand until later. Debbie died on a Wednesday in October, pancreatic cancer. She'd been diagnosed 8 months earlier and gone downhill fast. I'd visited her every week toward the end, sitting beside her hospital bed at Mercy General, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of sleep. My mother visited twice. Both times, she spent more time talking to the doctors about the prognosis than sitting with her own mother. Lisa came once for 20 minutes because she had a hair appointment she couldn't reschedule. At the funeral, I was a wreck. I sat in the front row with tears streaming down my face while the minister talked about Debbie's kindness, her generosity, her love for her family. My mother stood at the podium and delivered a eulogy about what a wonderful mother Debbie had been, how much she'd sacrificed, how much she'd taught her daughter about strength and perseverance. I remember thinking, when did you learn any of that? After the service, family gathered at my parents' house. I stayed in the corner, too raw to make small talk. Lisa worked the room like it was a networking event, accepting condolences with practiced grace. At one point, I overheard my mother talking to Aunt Margaret in the kitchen. "The estate is complicated," Jody was saying. "Medical bills, there won't be much left, but I'll make sure the girls get whatever there is." I didn't think anything of it at the time. 3 weeks later, we had the family meeting about the will. My mother sat us down in the living room, Lisa and me, and explained with great sympathy that Grandma Debbie's savings had been almost entirely depleted by medical expenses. "There's a small amount left," she said, "but Lisa needs it for her down payment. She's starting a family. I'm sure you understand, Amy." I understood. Of course I understood. Lisa was getting married. Lisa needed a house. Lisa was building the kind of life our mother approved of. And me? I was just doing that computer thing. I could wait. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that my mother had looked me in the eye and stolen $43,700 from me with a sad smile and a sympathetic pat on the hand. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. Let me tell you about Thanksgiving, 3 years before everything changed. This was the first Thanksgiving after I found out the truth. I went anyway. I sat at Lisa's table with the knowledge burning a hole in my chest, and I watched. The house was fully decorated by then. Lisa had spent $18,000 on furniture that first year, another $12,000 on landscaping. She'd mentioned the numbers casually over dinner, the way you mentioned the weather. My mother glowed. "Lisa has such taste," she told Aunt Margaret. "She knows exactly what she wants." I looked at the dining table we were sitting at. Solid walnut. I'd priced similar ones when I was dreaming about having a real apartment someday. They ran about $4,000. That table was bought with my grandmother's money Debbie had saved for me. After dinner, my father found me in the hallway. "You okay, kiddo? You've been quiet." "I'm fine, Dad, just tired." He nodded, patted my shoulder, walked away. I wondered if he knew. I wondered if he'd signed off on it or if my mother had handled everything without telling him. I wondered if it would matter either way. That night, driving home, I pulled over on the side of the road and screamed into my steering wheel until my throat was raw. Then I wiped my eyes, drove to my apartment, and added another entry to my spreadsheet. The idea for the app came from my own desperation. When you're a freelancer with inconsistent income and $54,000 in student loans, you learn to track every single penny. I built spreadsheets. I built systems. I built a way to survive. One night, around 2 a.m., I was staring at my budget tracker and thought, what if other people needed this too? I started coding that same night. I worked until 4 in the morning, slept for 3 hours, then worked on client projects all day before returning to my own code at midnight. I called it SentSense. It was a financial management app specifically designed for freelancers, for people whose income arrived in irregular chunks, for people who needed to know exactly where they stood at any given moment. It tracked invoices, predicted cash flow, flagged potential shortfalls before they became emergencies. It was everything I wished I'd had when I was starting out. I launched a beta version on Reddit, on forums, on every freelancer community I could find. The feedback was immediate. People didn't just like it, they needed it. One user wrote, "This is the first time I felt in control of my finances in 5 years." Another said, "I actually slept through the night for the first time since going freelance." Within 6 months, I had 40,000 users. Within a year, a fintech company in Seattle reached out. They wanted to acquire SenseSense. They wanted to integrate it into their platform. They offered $2.3 million. I didn't accept immediately. I hired a lawyer, I negotiated for 2 weeks, I kept 12% equity and a consulting contract. After investors and taxes, I walked away with $1.56 million in my account. I signed the papers on a Tuesday in March, exactly 4 years after Mary Aldridge handed me that folder. I didn't tell anyone in my family, not a single word. They thought I was drowning. I was learning to build a boat. Let me tell you about Thanksgiving, the year before everything changed. Lisa hosted, as always. Her house smelled like cinnamon and roasting turkey. She'd renovated the kitchen that spring. $34,000, she announced, within 5 minutes of everyone's arrival. Custom cabinets, a farmhouse sink, pendant lights that looked like something from a magazine. My mother gave the tour as if she'd designed it herself. Lisa picked these tiles herself. Isn't she talented? This island was her idea. She has such an eye. I stood by the drink table with a glass of sparkling water and watched. 22 relatives packed into that house. Aunts I saw once a year, cousins who'd been fed the same story everyone else had, Uncle Dennis, who'd once offered to lend me money because my mother told him I was behind on rent. I wasn't behind on rent. I'd never been behind on rent. But my mother had told him I was, and he'd believed her, because why would a mother lie about her own daughter? Dinner was fine. The turkey was dry, but nobody mentioned it. Lisa's husband, Brad, talked about his job in pharmaceutical sales. My father ate quietly and didn't look at anyone. Then, during dessert, my mother turned to me with that smile, the one that looked like concern but cut like a credit check. "Amy, honey, are you still in that little apartment?" The table got quiet. Not silent, just that particular kind of quiet where everyone's pretending not to listen. "Yes, Mom, same place." I ran into Carla Brennan at the store last week. She mentioned some affordable units opening up in Gresham might be more realistic for your budget. I felt 22 pairs of eyes shift toward me. I'm fine where I am. Lisa leaned forward, tilting her head the way people tilt their heads at rescue animals. "There's no shame in downsizing, Amy. We all have to make adjustments sometimes." My mother nodded gravely. "Your sister's right. Maybe if you found something smaller, you could finally start saving." I looked at the pendant lights, the custom cabinets, the farmhouse sink, all of it paid for with money my grandmother had left for me. I smiled. "I'll think about it." After dinner, I helped clear the table. In the hallway, I passed the bathroom and heard Lisa's voice through the door talking to Carso, Rachel. "Mom says Amy's jealous of my house. It's sad, really. She just doesn't have the drive." I stopped walking. Some people are just meant to rent, you know? Not everyone can build something. I stood there for maybe 5 seconds, then I walked to the coat closet, got my jacket, and left without saying goodbye. That night, in my apartment, I opened my laptop and checked the SenseSense user numbers. 62,000 and climbing. What happened next still gives me chills. The acquisition closed 3 months later. I sat in a conference room in Seattle with lawyers and executives and signed my name to documents that would change my life. The fintech CEO shook my hand and said, "You built something special here, Amy." I thanked him. I smiled. I drove back to Portland in a daze. $1.56 million. The number didn't feel real. I checked my bank account 17 times in the first week, sure there had been some kind of mistake. There wasn't. I didn't change anything at first. I kept my apartment, I kept my old car, I kept my clients, though I started being more selective about which projects I took. I didn't want anyone to notice, not yet, but I started looking at houses. The house in West Hills wasn't the first one I looked at. For 3 months, I drove through neighborhoods every Saturday morning alone, coffee in the cup holder, phone on silent. I wasn't looking for square footage or investment potential. I was looking for something I couldn't name. I looked at condos in the Pearl District, too sterile. I looked at craftsman bungalows in Alberta, too small. I looked at new construction in Hillsborough that all looked exactly the same. Then I found it on a hillside in early spring. 4 bedrooms, wraparound deck, a wall of windows that turned the sunset into something you could live inside. The backyard sloped down toward a valley filled with Douglas firs that swayed in the wind like they were breathing. The listing price was $980,000. I stood in the empty living room during the open house and watched the light move across the hardwood floors. I walked out onto the deck and looked at the valley below, at the trees stretching toward the horizon. This is it, I thought. This is what I've been looking for. I ran the numbers twice, called my financial advisor, reviewed my portfolio. The Sense acquisition had closed 3 months earlier. My consulting income was steady. My investments were growing. I could afford it. I made an offer on a Wednesday. It was accepted by Friday. 3 weeks later, I sat in a title office and signed my name 43 times. They handed me a key and a folder containing the deed. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Lisa. I didn't post anything. I drove to my new house, unlocked the front door, and stood in the empty living room while the afternoon light poured through the glass wall and turned the hardwood floors to honey. I had the key. I had the deed. What I didn't have was a reason to tell my family. Not yet. I furnished the house slowly. A couch first, deep gray, big enough to disappear into. A bed frame made of reclaimed wood that I found at an estate sale in Selwood. A kitchen table, solid oak, slightly scratched. I liked the scratches. They made it feel earned. I painted the guest room a soft sage green. I hung curtains in the bedroom that filtered the morning light into something golden and warm. I bought plants, more than I'd ever owned before, and learned to keep them alive. The only person I invited over was Mary Aldridge. She stood in the entryway for a long moment, looking up at the vaulted ceiling, then out through the glass at the valley below, her eyes filled with tears. "Debbie would be so proud," she said. "You're exactly who she knew you'd become." We had dinner on the deck that night. Mary brought a bottle of wine and a lavender plant from her garden. We watched the sunset turn the clouds pink and orange and didn't talk about my mother or my sister at all. It was the most peaceful evening I'd had in years. Mary started coming over every Sunday after that. She'd bring something from her garden, flowers or vegetables or herbs, and we'd cook dinner together. She told me stories about Debbie, things I'd never known, how Debbie had wanted to be a teacher but couldn't afford college, how she'd learned to garden from her own grandmother, how she'd once driven 6 hours to surprise Mary on her birthday. "She was so proud of you," Mary said one evening. "Every time I talked to her, she'd tell me about something you were working on. That girl is going to do something special," she'd say. "I just know it." I hadn't known Debbie talked about me that way. My mother had always made it seem like I was the family disappointment, the one who couldn't get her act together. But Debbie had seen something else. Debbie had believed in me. For the first time in 30 years, I understood what family was supposed to feel like. Before she left that night, Mary mentioned something I'd forgotten. "The time capsule," she said. "Debbie gave it to me for safekeeping. It's been 5 years next month." I remembered then. A wooden box my grandmother had prepared before she died, sealed with wax, with a letter attached that read, "To be opened 5 years after my passing, with both of my granddaughters present." Debbie had wanted her girls to open it together, a final gift, a final message. I looked out at the valley, at the firs swaying in the evening breeze. "I think I know exactly where to open it," I said. Mary smiled. "I thought you might. The invitation went out 3 weeks before the date. I designed it myself, simple and elegant, cream cardstock with navy lettering. You are invited to the opening of Deborah Ann Mercer's time capsule, March 15th, 2 p.m. Below that, my address in West Hills. I sent it to everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins, 23 people in total, and of course my mother, my father, and Lisa. My phone rang within an hour of the invitations arriving. "Amy, what is this address?" My mother's voice had that edge it got when she sensed something outside her control. "It's my place, Mom." "Your place? Since when do you live in West Hills?" "I moved a few months ago." A long pause. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke. See you Saturday." I hung up before she could respond. Later that evening, Lisa texted, "Mom says you're living in West Hills now? Are you house-sitting for someone?" I replied with just the address. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, see you Saturday, I guess. I put my phone on the counter and poured myself a glass of wine. They had no idea what was coming. My mother spent the next 3 weeks trying to figure out what I was doing. She called twice more fishing for information. I kept my answers short. Yes, it's my place. No, I'm not house sitting. Yes, there's parking. She called my cousin Rachel to see if Rachel knew anything. Rachel didn't. She even called Mary Aldrich, which I found out later, and Mary told her she didn't know anything about any house. Jody Mercer did not like mysteries. She especially didn't like mysteries that involved her children doing things she hadn't approved. Meanwhile, Lisa posted on Facebook a photo of her living room, freshly styled, with a caption that read, "Home is where the heart is." I saw it and smiled. She had no idea that her home, the one built on my inheritance, was about to look very different in comparison. 3 days before the event, I got a text from an unknown number. "Amy, this is your father. I got a new phone. I'll be there Saturday." It was the first time Paul Mercer had reached out to me directly in maybe 2 years. I stared at the message for a while. I didn't know what to make of it, but I replied, "Thanks, Dad. See you then." The Friday before the capsule opening, Mary came over to help me prepare. We set up chairs in the living room, arranged pastries and coffee on the kitchen island, and placed Debbie's time capsule on the mantel above the fireplace. It was a small wooden box, maybe 8 inches long, sealed with red wax. The letter was still attached with a faded ribbon. Mary touched it gently. "She spent a whole weekend making this," she said, "writing letters, choosing what to put inside. She wanted it to mean something." I looked at the box, then at the room around me, the house I'd built with money I'd earned, the life I'd created without any of them. "It will," I said. For 5 years, they'd been writing my story. On March 15th, I'd let them read the real one. Saturday arrived cold and bright. I woke at 6 a.m., too wired to sleep. I showered, dressed in a cream sweater and dark jeans. Nothing flashy, nothing trying too hard. I wanted the house to do the talking. By noon, the pastries were arranged, the coffee was brewing, and sunlight was streaming through the wall of windows, filling the living room with warmth. Mary arrived early, at 1:30. She brought more lavender from her garden. "You look calm," she said. "I feel calm," I told her. For the first time in 5 years, I actually feel calm. At 1:52, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked out the window. Lisa's white SUV sat on the stone, engine still running. I could see her through the windshield. She wasn't moving. 2 minutes passed, 3. Then she turned off the engine, got out, and stood on the driveway, staring at the house like it was a hallucination. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and held it to her ear. I watched through the window as she said the words I'd been waiting 5 years to hear. "Mom, you need to see this, right now." Jody and Paul arrived 17 minutes later. That's fast from Lake Oswego to West Hills on a Saturday. My mother must have driven like the house was on fire. I heard 2 car doors slam, heels on the stone path, fast and sharp. My father's slower footsteps behind. Lisa opened the front door before I could. "In here," she said. "Come look." My mother stepped into the entryway. She was wearing her good cardigan, the lavender one she saved for important occasions, and the pearl earrings my father had given her for their anniversary. She must have been getting ready for something when Lisa called. She looked up at the vaulted ceiling. She stopped. 5 seconds of silence, maybe 10. The only sound was the wind through the trees outside. "What is this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "My house, Mom. Welcome." She walked forward like she wasn't sure the floor would hold her weight. She touched the back of the couch, ran her fingers along the stone fireplace, stopped at the wall of windows and stared at the valley below. When she turned around, her face was the color of paper. "But you never said anything. How could you possibly afford—" "I've been a senior consultant for a fintech company for 2 years, Mom. I sold a software company I built before that. My salary and investments covered it." She blinked. "A software company?" "An app for financial management. You probably never asked about it because it was just that computer thing I did." The words hung in the air. My father stood in the doorway. He hadn't moved past the threshold. His eyes were red, and his chin was trembling in a way I'd never seen before. "I'm proud of you, Amy," he said. His voice cracked on my name. "I'm so proud of you." It was the first time he'd said those words to me since I was a child. My mother spun toward him. "Did you know about this?" "No, I didn't." Then my father did something I'd never seen him do in 36 years of marriage. He walked past my mother, crossed the room, and put his arms around me. I don't know how long he held me. It felt like a long time. His hands shook against my back. He smelled like coffee and aftershave, the same smell from every Christmas morning of my childhood. When he let go, the room had shifted. Lisa was sitting on the edge of the couch, knees pressed together, staring at the floor. My mother stood alone by the window, white-faced, hands at her sides. Outside, more cars were pulling into the driveway. The rest of the family had started to arrive. Within 30 minutes, there were 23 people in my house. Aunts and uncles I saw once a year, cousins who'd grown up hearing my mother's version of who I was, neighbors of Lisa's who'd been invited to witness what Jody assumed would be another opportunity to shine. Instead, they walked through my front door and went quiet. I watched their faces as they took in the vaulted ceilings, the wall of windows, the view that stretched for miles. I saw the confusion, the recalculation, the slow realization that something they'd been told for years didn't match what they were seeing. Aunt Margaret found me in the kitchen. "Amy, this is stunning. How did you?" "I sold a company I built," I said, "about 2 years ago." "A company?" She blinked. "Your mother never mentioned." "I'm sure she didn't." I handed Margaret a cup of coffee and smiled. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. At 2:15, I gathered everyone in the living room. Mary Aldridge sat in the corner, hands folded in her lap, watching everything with quiet attention. My mother had positioned herself near the back, as far from me as possible. My father stood beside her, but there was space between them that hadn't been there before. Lisa sat in the front row, Brad beside her, her eyes fixed on the wooden box on the mantel. I lifted the box and brought it to the coffee table in the center of the room. "For those of you who don't know," I said, "my grandmother Debbie prepared this time capsule before she passed. She wanted it opened 5 years after her death, with both of her granddaughters present." I looked at Lisa. "So, Lisa, let's open it together." Lisa hesitated. Then she stood and walked to the table. We broke the wax seal together. Inside were letters, small objects, photographs. I lifted the first letter out. It was addressed, to be read aloud. I unfolded it and began to read. "My dearest family, if you're hearing this, then 5 years have passed since I left you. I hope those years have been good ones. I hope you've taken care of each other." My voice was steady. I'd practiced this. "I want you to know that everything I had, I gave with intention. I didn't have much, but what I had, I wanted to share equally between my granddaughters. They were both precious to me. I loved them both the same." I looked up from the letter. The room was silent. "That's why I divided my savings equally between them, $43,700 each. I hoped that money would help them build the lives they deserved." I kept reading. "I know money can complicate things. It can reveal things about people you didn't want to see. But I trusted my family to do the right thing. I trusted my daughter to honor my wishes." I stopped. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I folded the letter, set it on the table, and looked at my mother. "Mom," I said, "you told me there was almost nothing left. You said Lisa needed it more for her down payment." My mother's face had gone from white to red to something gray and terrible. That was a family decision. We discussed it." I reached under the coffee table where I'd placed the folder that morning and pulled it out. Inside was a copy of Debbie's will with the asset distribution page on top, a bank statement showing a deposit of $43,700 into Lisa's account, dated 2 weeks after the funeral, and my mother's signature on the executor's form. I set each document on the table, one by one. $43,700 that was supposed to be mine, deposited in Lisa's account exactly 14 days after Grandma's funeral. Your signature on every page, Mom. Lisa's voice came out strangled. I didn't know. Mom said it was her savings. Mom told me the will was different. I never saw. She turned to Jody. You told me Amy's portion went to medical bills. You said there was nothing left for her. I did what was best for this family. My mother's voice had gone high and thin, the voice of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse. Lisa needed a house. She was getting married. Amy was always fine on her own. She was always fine, I repeated, because I had no choice. I looked around the room, at the aunts who'd offered me sympathy, at the uncles who'd sent me job listings, at the cousins who'd heard for years that Amy was the one who couldn't get her life together. For 5 years, I said, you've all been told a story about me, that I was struggling, that I was jealous of Lisa, that I couldn't afford anything, couldn't build anything, couldn't succeed at anything. I gestured at the room around us. This is the truth. I built a company from nothing. I sold it for $2.3 million. I bought this house with money I earned, while my grandmother's gift to me was sitting in my sister's kitchen the whole time. My mother opened her mouth to speak. My father cut her off. Jody, stop. Everyone turned to look at him. His voice was quiet, but there was something in it I'd never heard before. I knew. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. I knew what you did. You showed me a fake statement. You told me the fund had been depleted. But I should have looked harder. I should have asked questions. I should have protected my daughter, and I didn't. He looked at me. I'm sorry, Amy. I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything for a long moment. What was there to say? I'm not asking for the money back, I said finally. I don't need it anymore. I built everything you see around you without it. I looked at my mother. But I needed everyone in this room to know the truth. I looked at Lisa. I'm not angry at you, Lisa. You didn't know, but you also didn't ask. For 5 years, you benefited from something that wasn't yours, and you never once questioned where it came from. Lisa's mascara was running. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Amy. I know. I picked up Debbie's letter from the table. Grandma wanted honesty. She wanted this family to take care of each other. She trusted us. I looked at my mother one more time. Now we all know how that trust was honored. The family left in small groups over the next hour. Aunt Margaret hugged me on her way out and whispered, I'm sorry I believed her. Uncle Dennis shook my hand and said, You should have told us. Maybe, I said, but would you have believed me? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. My mother left without saying goodbye. She walked to her car with her spine rigid and her face set like stone. My father followed a few steps behind, but at the car door he stopped and looked back at me. I'll call you, he said. I nodded. Lisa was the last to leave. She stood in my entryway for a long moment, her eyes swollen, her expensive bag hanging limp from her hand. I didn't know, she said again. I believe you. Can we talk sometime? Not today, but maybe. I'm not ready yet. She nodded, wiped her eyes, walked to her car. I watched her drive away. Mary Aldridge appeared beside me, a dish towel over her shoulder from helping clean up. How do you feel? I thought about it. Tired, but lighter than I felt in 5 years. She put her arm around me. Debbie would have been proud of you today, not because of the house, because you told the truth, even when it was hard. I leaned into her shoulder. Thank you, Mary, for everything, for keeping that folder, for being here. She squeezed my arm. That's what family does, sweetheart. That was 3 months ago. The fallout was faster than I expected. Within a week, the whole extended family knew the truth. Jody had spent years building a narrative, and I dismantled it in 15 minutes with a folder of documents and my grandmother's own words. She tried to spin it, of course. She called Aunt Margaret and said Mary Aldridge had manipulated me. She told Uncle Dennis that I'd taken things out of context. She insisted to anyone who would listen that she'd done what any mother would do, that she'd been protecting the family, that Amy had always been too sensitive. But there was a will with her signature on it. There was a bank statement with dates and amounts. There were 23 witnesses who'd stood in my living room and heard her stammer excuses while the evidence sat on my coffee table. You can't talk your way around ink on paper. One by one, the calls to my mother stopped. Aunt Margaret didn't invite her to the summer barbecue. Uncle Dennis stopped asking her to organize family events. The group chat that I'd been excluded from for years went quiet, then reformed without her. My mother lost the one thing she valued more than money, the narrative. My father called me 3 weeks after the capsule opening. "Can I come see you?" I hesitated. "Not to make excuses," he said. "Not to ask you to forgive your mother. I'd like to see your house, if that's okay." He arrived on a Saturday with a toolbox in his hand. "Your deck railing looked loose," he said. "Thought I could fix it." We didn't talk much that afternoon. He worked on the railing, I made coffee. We sat on the deck and watched the light change over the valley. Before he left, he stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the house. "You built something good, Amy." "I know. I should have seen it sooner." "Yes, you should have." He nodded, got in his car, drove away. He calls every few weeks now. Sometimes I answer. We're not close, not the way fathers and daughters are supposed to be, but he's trying. That has to count for something. Lisa and I met for coffee 6 weeks after everything happened. She looked different, thinner. Her makeup couldn't quite cover the circles under her eyes. "Brad left," she said. "I'm sorry." She shrugged. "He said he married me, not my mother. He said he couldn't trust anything I told him anymore because I'd been repeating her lies for years without even knowing it." She stirred her coffee without looking at me. "He wasn't wrong." "What are you going to do?" "Selling the house." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Can't afford the mortgage on my own anyway. I'm looking at apartments in Tigard." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? She looked up at me. "I'm sorry, Amy. I know I keep saying it, but I am. I spent 10 years feeling superior to you, and the whole time you were living in a house built on my inheritance." "Yeah." We sat with that for a while. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "I'm not sure I can forgive you yet, but I don't hate you. That's more than I deserve. Maybe." She finished her coffee, paid the check, walked out into the gray Portland afternoon. "I don't know if we'll ever be close, but we're talking now. That's more than we had before." My mother and I haven't spoken since the capsule opening. She sent me a letter about a month after, 3 pages of justification, self-pity, and accusations. I threw it away without finishing it. She sent another one a few weeks later. This one was shorter. It said she was sorry if I felt hurt by her decisions. If I felt hurt. I threw that one away too. The third letter arrived last week. It was one sentence. "I don't know how to fix this." I read it twice. Then I put it in a drawer. Maybe someday we'll talk. Maybe we won't. But if we do, it'll be on my terms, in my house, with the truth already spoken. I'm done performing for her. I'm done shrinking to fit the version of me she wanted to show the world. I'm sitting on my deck right now, telling you this story. It's late afternoon, the valley is green and gold below me. The Douglas firs are swaying in that slow way they do when the wind can't decide which direction to blow. Mary Aldridge is coming for dinner later. She comes every Sunday now. We cook together, drink wine, talk about Debbie. She's the closest thing to family I have, and she's not even blood. My grandmother used to say that money doesn't change people, it just reveals who they always were. She was right. $43,700 revealed that my mother valued appearances over her own daughter. It revealed that my sister would take without questioning. It revealed that my father would stay silent to keep the peace, even when the peace was built on theft. And it revealed something about me, too. I could have confronted them years ago. I could have screamed and accused and demanded what was mine. But I chose a different path. I chose to build something they couldn't take, something they couldn't diminish, something that would speak louder than any argument. I didn't build this house to prove them wrong. I built it because I deserved a life that wasn't written by someone else's lies. 3 things I learned the hard way. 1. Patience isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. The loudest response I ever gave my family was a house on a hill and a wooden box on a table. 2. You don't owe anyone a confrontation, but you owe yourself the truth. Debbie's letter didn't fix everything, but it meant nobody could rewrite my story again. 3. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with better locks. My mother can knock, she just can't walk in and rearrange the furniture anymore. If any of this hit home, leave a comment and tell me which of those 3 lessons landed hardest for you. And if you know someone who's been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to lift them up, share this story with them. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thanks for staying until the end. I mean that. I'll see you in the next one.